The sun had just started to rise over the calm sea, casting a golden glow across the glass windows of the luxury coastal hotel where Amara worked. She tied her apron neatly and greeted her fellow staff with her usual warm smile, ready to begin another long day. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air as she moved gracefully between tables, taking orders and refilling cups with practiced ease. Though the job was tiring and the pay never quite enough, Amara found quiet pride in doing her work with care. She treated every guest with kindness, whether they offered her a polite thank you or not. Most barely noticed her, but she never let it bother her. Years of experience had taught her that respect wasn't always given freely, but dignity could always be maintained. That morning, however, there was something different in the air and unease she couldn't explain. A group of wealthy young guests arrived for a private event, their laughter echoing through the lobby like a performance, dressed in designer clothes and wearing smug smiles. They carried an aura of arrogance that seemed to darken the brightness of the room. Amara greeted them politely, but her friendly words were met with whispers and poorly hidden giggles. One of them, a tall man in a white linen shirt, looked her up and down and smirked. "Looks like service here comes with a side of struggle," he joked, making the others burst into laughter. Amara forced a polite smile, her heart sinking for just a moment before she turned away to finish her work. She had faced worse comments before, but something about this group felt crueler, more deliberate. Throughout the morning, they called her over repeatedly, not because they needed anything, but to mock her every move, complaining about the temperature of their drinks, teasing her for her accent, and laughing at the way she hurried to serve them. Still, Amara refused to lose her composure. She kept her tone calm, her manners sharp, her smile steady, even as she felt the sting of their words deep inside. Her fellow staff noticed, but said nothing. They knew she wouldn't want them to interfere. By noon, the event set up by the pool was nearly complete, and Amara's legs ached from walking non-stop. The group lounged near the water, their laughter echoing over the sound of the waves. As she approached with a tray of chilled drinks, she could feel their eyes following her, waiting for something to happen. A strange tension filled the air, a quiet warning that the day was far from over. Amara took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "Just one more shift," unaware that before the sun would set, this ordinary day would turn into the one everyone at the hotel would remember forever. By the time the sun reached its peak, the poolside of the luxury hotel had transformed into a scene of noise and chaos. Music boomed from hidden speakers, laughter echoed across the shimmering water, and glasses clinked in celebration. The afternoon event had officially begun, and Amara was at the center of it, all moving swiftly between tables, balancing trays filled with chilled drinks and snacks, her every step guided by years of quiet discipline. The heat was unforgiving, the air thick with the scent of sunscreen and expensive perfume. Yet Amara kept her focus, her face calm, her smile polite. She had handled crowds before, but today was different. The same group of wealthy guests from the morning had positioned themselves near the pool, their behavior louder and crueler as the day went on. Their laughter carried a mocking tone that seemed to slice through the air every time she passed by. One of them, a woman with glittering sunglasses, leaned back in her chair and nudged her friend. "There she goes again," she said loudly, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "She's practically running to serve us. How, devoted." The others burst into laughter, pretending not to notice Amara's stiffened posture as she kept walking. They whispered to each other, like children sharing a secret joke, their eyes following her with unkind amusement. To them, she wasn't a person with thoughts or dreams. She was simply part of the scenery, a moving background to their luxury afternoon. Amara, however, refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her falter. Each time she passed by their table, she held her head high, her movements graceful and precise. But inside, a quiet storm brewed, a mix of sadness, anger, and exhaustion. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down another tray of glasses, the condensation dripping onto her apron. She told herself it didn't matter, that she had survived worse days, that respect couldn't be forced from the unkind. Yet, no matter how hard she tried to ignore them, their cruel laughter seemed to follow her everywhere she went. Other guests began to notice the tension, some exchanging uneasy glances, others pretending not to see. The hotel manager stood at a distance, too concerned with appearances to step in. As the music grew louder, the air around the pool grew heavy with the heat of both the sun and silent judgment. Amara wiped the sweat from her forehead, her heart pounding as she carried another tray toward the laughing group. Something about their grins, their careless words, felt like the calm before a storm. The day that had begun with golden light now carried an undercurrent of something darker. Amara didn't know it yet, but the crowd's laughter, the same sound that had stung her heart all morning, was about to turn into silence. Something was about to happen that none of them would ever forget. The sound of laughter and splashing filled the air as the poolside crowd grew louder. The afternoon sun glinting off the water's surface like shards of glass. Amara carried a heavy tray of colorful drinks, carefully balancing each glass as she made her way through the crowded deck. Her shoes clicked softly on the tiles, her steps precise, despite the noise and chaos around her. She could hear the group of wealthy guests nearby, their voices sharp with mischief. They had been watching her all afternoon, whispering and laughing each time she walked by. Amara ignored them, focusing on her work, silently counting the steps between the bar and the tables. But as she approached their corner, time seemed to slow. One of the men in the group leaned back lazily, pretending to stretch. His foot slid forward just a few inches, but enough. Amara didn't see it. Her shoe caught the edge of his sneaker, and before she could react, the world tilted. The tray slipped from her hands, the drinks arcing through the air in a glittering cascade before crashing to the ground. The sharp sound of shattering glass echoed, followed by gasps, and then Amara's body lurched forward, her arms flailing for balance, but there was nothing to hold on to. With a helpless cry, she plunged into the pool, the cold water swallowing her whole. For a few seconds, everything was quiet. The muffled world beneath the water was blue and still, but inside her, a storm raged. The shock of the cold hit her skin, but it couldn't compare to the burning humiliation that spread through her chest. Above the surface, laughter exploded again, loud, cruel, and echoing off the hotel walls. Someone whistled mockingly. Another clapped. Phones appeared in hands, flashes of cameras capturing her moment of shame. Amara's heart broke as she sank deeper, her uniform heavy, her hair floating around her like seaweed. She didn't want to come up, not yet. Down there, under the water, the noise faded. She could cry without anyone seeing. Her tears mixed with the chlorine, and she thought of every long day, every rude guest, every quiet moment she had swallowed her pride to keep her job. Finally, she pushed herself upward, gasping as she broke the surface. The sun blinded her, but she could still hear the laughter. Some guests looked away in discomfort, while others continued to record, entertained by her pain. Amara climbed out of the pool slowly, her clothes clinging to her, her hands trembling. The man who had tripped her smirked, pretending it was an accident. "Watch where you're going," he said lightly, as if nothing had happened. She said nothing. Her silence spoke louder than any words could. As she walked away, water dripping from her uniform, the laughter still echoed behind her. But none of them realized what was coming next, that this single act of cruelty would soon turn into a lesson they'd never forget, one written not in humiliation, but in karma. Water dripped steadily from Amara's hair as she climbed out of the pool, her uniform heavy and clinging to her skin. The world around her was strangely quiet for a moment, as if even the air itself was unsure how to react. Then came another burst of laughter from the group near the edge, loud and awkward, trying to fill the silence that had begun to settle. But Amara didn't respond. She didn't shout or defend herself. She didn't even glance at the man who had tripped her. Instead, she stood still for a few seconds, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath, her face calm to calm. Droplets rolled down her cheeks, and for a moment, no one could tell if they were tears or water from the pool. The mocking laughter started to fade, replaced by a quiet unease that spread among the guests. Something about the way she looked at them, steady, unbroken, almost dignified, made them shift uncomfortably in their seats. They had expected anger, maybe tears or curses. They had wanted a reaction to feed their amusement, but Amara gave them none. She simply adjusted her soaked shirt, pushed back her wet hair, and met their eyes, one by one. There was no hatred in her expression, only a strange, haunting calm that made them look away first. The sound of dripping water was the only noise as she turned and began to walk away, each step leaving a wet footprint on the hot tiles. Behind her, the laughter stopped completely. A few people muttered that it had gone too far. The man who tripped her laughed again, but the sound came out hollow, unsure. His friends avoided his gaze, pretending to check their phones or sip their drinks. The hotel music continued faintly in the background, but even it seemed distant, like it didn't belong in the same space anymore. Guests who had been lounging nearby whispered quietly, shaking their heads. Some even felt embarrassed to be there, to have witnessed something so unnecessary. As Amara disappeared through the glass doors, the group finally fell silent. They didn't know what unsettled them more, the sight of her humiliation, or the quiet strength she carried even after it. In that moment, their laughter felt small, childish, and cruel. A strange heaviness lingered in the air, one that no joke or drink could erase. They had seen a woman stripped of her dignity, yet somehow, she had walked away with more of it than they could ever claim. Hours later, her wet footprints had dried under the sun, but for those who had laughed, the image of her calm face stayed fresh in their minds. None of them could shake the feeling that something had shifted. The silence she left behind wasn't just awkward, it was haunting. They had mocked her for being beneath them, yet deep down, every one of them knew they had been the ones exposed. Amara sat quietly in the corner of the staff lounge, her wet uniform folded beside her and a towel draped over her shoulders. The air conditioner hummed softly, the only sound in the room besides the faint ticking of a wall clock. Her co-workers had offered words of comfort, but she had only nodded politely, her expression calm, unreadable. Inside, though, her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her phone. The humiliation still burned in her memory, the laughter, the stares, the feeling of cold water swallowing her pride. But there was no anger in her eyes now, only a quiet resolve that no one around her understood. She scrolled through her contacts and pressed a single number, waiting as the line rang. When the call connected, her voice softened. "It happened again," she said, her tone steady despite the weight of her words. She listened for a few seconds, her gaze fixed on the window where the pool area was just barely visible in the distance. "No, I'm fine," she added after a pause, her voice almost too calm. "But I think it's time." Those few words carried a strength far beyond their simplicity. After she hung up, Amara sat still for a long moment, as if gathering her thoughts. Then she stood, took a slow breath, and walked to her manager's office. The manager, a kind but nervous man, looked up from his desk the moment she entered. "Amara, I'm so sorry," he began quickly. "I already spoke to security." She shook her head gently, cutting him off. "It's all right," she said quietly. "Someone will be arriving soon to discuss the incident." Her voice was calm but carried an undertone of finality, as if she knew exactly what was about to happen. The manager blinked, confused. "Someone? From where?" he asked cautiously. Amara simply gave a small smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You'll see," she replied, before walking back toward the lounge. The other staff members exchanged puzzled looks, whispering among themselves. No one could guess who she had called. Was it her family? A lawyer? Someone from the hotel chain? There was no clue in her tone, only quiet assurance. Outside, the laughter by the pool had grown softer, replaced by the faint hum of conversation. A few of the guests who had mocked her earlier avoided looking toward the staff area, as if some part of them sensed that the story wasn't over. Amara poured herself a glass of water, her movements calm and deliberate. Every gesture carried quiet control, the kind that made others uneasy, without understanding why. She sat by the window again, her gaze steady on the hotel driveway, waiting. There was no bitterness on her face, only patience. The moments stretched, the ticking clock marking every second that passed. No one noticed the sleek black car pulling up outside until the sound of its engine cut through the air. The hotel doorman straightened nervously as the door opened and a tall figure stepped out. Amara rose from her chair slowly, her towel falling from her shoulders. Whatever pain she had carried was now replaced by something else, an unshakable calm that felt almost powerful. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and she was ready to face it. An hour later, the luxury hotel buzzed with uneasy whispers. The poolside laughter that had once filled the air had turned uncertain and tense. Guests lounged in silence now, glancing toward the main entrance every time the sound of tires echoed from the driveway. Then, without warning, a sleek black luxury car glided to a stop in front of the hotel doors. Its glossy surface reflected the afternoon sun, commanding attention before the driver even stepped out. Conversations froze. Even the staff paused, mid-task, sensing something was about to change. The car door opened slowly, and out stepped a tall man in a tailored suit, his presence calm yet commanding. His sharp eyes scanned the area, as if measuring every detail, the expensive decor, the uneasy guests, the faint echo of laughter that still lingered from earlier. He moved with quiet authority, not rushing, not needing to. Every step he took across the marble floor carried weight, and the murmurs around him grew louder, filled with curiosity and speculation. The receptionist hurried forward, her practiced smile trembling slightly. "Good afternoon, sir. Can I help you?" she asked, her voice unsure. But the man didn't stop. He didn't even glance at the desk. His gaze was fixed on one direction, the pool area beyond the glass doors. Without a word, he pushed them open and stepped outside. The breeze carried the faint scent of salt from the nearby sea, and the sound of water lapping against the pool's edge filled the silence. Guests straightened in their lounge chairs, watching as the man's polished shoes clicked softly against the tiles. He stopped at the edge of the crowd, scanning the faces until his eyes found her. Amara. She stood near the back, her uniform still damp, her hair slightly disheveled, but her expression calm, composed in a way that made her seem almost untouchable. The moment their eyes met, something in the air shifted. The arrogance that had once filled the space now dissolved into an uneasy quiet. The man's face softened for a brief second before returning to his composed expression. He walked toward her, ignoring the curious stares that followed him. A guest whispered, "Who is he?" But no one dared speak louder. When he reached Amara, he stopped just short of her, his voice low but steady. "Are you all right?" he asked, and though his tone was gentle, it carried enough strength to make everyone around take notice. Amara nodded slightly, her eyes glistening not with tears, but with quiet relief. "I am now," she said softly. The guests exchanged nervous glances, realizing that this man wasn't just anyone. His presence alone commanded respect, but the way he looked at Amara with familiarity, with Kerr, made it clear there was a deeper connection. The silence was heavy, stretching over the pool like a cloud before a storm. The man turned then, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the guests who had laughed earlier. No words were spoken, yet the message was clear. Every mocking grin, every cruel whisper, they all suddenly felt small under his quiet scrutiny. Amara stood beside him now, her head held high, her earlier humiliation melting into something far more powerful: dignity. No one laughed anymore. No one dared. The story that had begun as mockery was shifting into something else, entirely something that none of them would forget. The air around the pool felt thick, almost electric, as all eyes turned toward the tall man standing beside Amara. The guests who had been laughing earlier now sat frozen, their smirks fading into confusion. He stood with quiet confidence, his posture straight, his gaze calm but firm. For a long moment, no one spoke. The sound of water rippling in the pool was the only thing breaking the silence. Then, in a voice steady and composed, the man greeted her warmly, his expression softening. "You've had a rough day, haven't you?" he said gently, his words carrying the kind of care that only love could shape. Amara nodded faintly, though she didn't look away. She didn't need to explain, he already knew. The guests shifted uncomfortably, sensing that whatever was happening was far bigger than they had imagined. The man turned to face them now, his calm eyes sweeping over the group that had ridiculed his wife just hours before. "Good afternoon," he began, his tone polite yet commanding, the kind that instantly silenced whispers. "My name is Malik Davis. My wife and I recently finalized the purchase of this hotel." For a second, no one reacted. The words seemed too heavy, too unexpected to sink in at once. Then, slowly, a collective gasp spread through the crowd like a wave. Glasses clinked, someone choked on a drink, and one of the women covered her mouth in disbelief. "Wife?" someone whispered. Malik nodded once, his gaze never wavering. "Yes," he said simply, his voice calm, but edged with quiet strength. "My wife." The group exchanged panicked glances, trying to process what they had just heard. The same woman they had laughed at, mocked, and humiliated, the same waitress they had treated like she didn't belong, was now standing beside the new owner of the very place they were staying. The irony hit them harder than any reprimand could. One of the guests tried to laugh nervously, as if hoping it was some kind of mistake. But the hotel manager appeared at that very moment, his face pale but professional. "Yes," he confirmed, clearing his throat nervously. "It's true. The transfer was completed last week. Mr. and Mrs. Davis are the new owners." The room went completely silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the pool's filter and the distant crash of waves against the shore. Malik looked around slowly, his calm demeanor unwavering. "This hotel," he continued, "was built to welcome people from all walks of life, with kindness and respect. Something that, it seems, has been forgotten by a few." No one dared to meet his eyes. A few of the guests lowered their heads, the weight of shame pressing down on them like gravity. Amara stood beside him quietly, not with arrogance, but with grace. She didn't gloat or smirk. She simply stood tall, her silence saying more than words ever could. The laughter that had once filled the air was now replaced with tension, embarrassment, and regret. Malik took Amara's hand, his voice softening once again. "Come," he said gently. "Let's make sure this place becomes what it was meant to be." Together, they walked away, leaving the guests standing in stunned silence. No one knew what to say. The woman they had humiliated had turned out to be the one with the most power, and yet, she had chosen dignity over revenge. And that, more than anything, was what truly silenced them. The tension around the poolside could almost be felt in the air, as Malik stood silently before the guests who had humiliated Amara just hours ago. His calmness carried more weight than fury ever could. The group shifted uneasily, their earlier confidence and laughter long gone. They avoided his gaze, their eyes darting toward the exit, as if hoping to vanish before he spoke. But Malik didn't shout, didn't insult, and didn't demand an apology. Instead, he took a slow step forward, his composure like steel wrapped in silk. "I believe there's been enough disturbance for one day," he said, his voice low but powerful, the kind of tone that left no room for argument. Then, without breaking his steady rhythm, He reached into his jacket and pulled out a neatly folded paper, their hotel bill. He handed it calmly to the head of security, who stood nearby, silent and alert. Turning back to the stunned guests, Malik said with a polite smile that carried quiet finality, "We no longer need your business here." His words struck harder than any public scolding could. The politeness in his voice made the humiliation even deeper, his grace cutting through their arrogance like a blade. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then one of the guests, a man who had been the loudest earlier, opened his mouth to protest, but stopped halfway when Malik's steady gaze met his. There was no anger in Malik's eyes, only calm authority and quiet disappointment, which made the man feel smaller than he ever had in his life. Slowly, the group began to gather their things, their laughter replaced by silence. The music in the background, which had once added to their noise, now felt like an awkward echo of their earlier arrogance. Amara stood quietly at the edge of the pool area, still in her damp uniform, watching the scene unfold with composed stillness. She didn't smile or gloat. She simply stood tall, her dignity radiating more power than revenge ever could. The guests avoided looking at her, guilt tightening their throats. Some tried to mumble weak apologies, but the words came out broken, empty. Malik didn't respond. He just waited patiently as they packed up their designer bags and expensive sunglasses, their faces pale with embarrassment. Even the staff, who had been too afraid to speak earlier, now watched with quiet satisfaction. It wasn't just a rich man's authority that silenced the bullies, it was the way justice arrived without a single shout. Without revenge, only truth and class. When the last of the guests walked toward the exit, Malik turned to the staff and simply nodded, signaling that everything was fine now. Then he looked at Amara, his expression softening. "You didn't deserve that," he said quietly. She shook her head slightly, her eyes glistening not from sadness this time, but from relief. The security guards escorted the guests out, and the heavy atmosphere slowly began to lift. It was poetic, almost cinematic, the way Karma had walked in, dressed in a tailored suit and quiet grace. For everyone who witnessed it, that day became more than a lesson. It became a reminder that respect costs nothing, and kindness, once lost, is always repaid in style. That evening, the golden light of sunset spread softly across the hotel courtyard, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The chaos of the afternoon had passed, but the air still carried a quiet sense of something unforgettable. Amara walked back toward the poolside, her hair neatly tied and her uniform freshly pressed. There was no trace of bitterness on her face, only calm determination. Guests who had witnessed the earlier scene looked at her differently now, some with guilt, others with respect. She moved with the same grace she always had, greeting people with gentle smiles, her voice steady and professional. It was as though she had chosen to rise above the ugliness of what had happened. As she placed fresh drinks on a nearby table, a familiar shadow fell beside her. Malik stood there, no longer the commanding figure from earlier, but simply a man, her husband, who looked at her with quiet admiration. Without saying a word, he picked up a tray and began serving the guests with her. Some of the staff exchanged surprised glances. The owner of the hotel, serving drinks. But Malik only smiled faintly, his actions speaking louder than status ever could. "You didn't have to come back," Amara said softly, her voice low enough that only he could hear. He looked at her, his eyes warm with pride. "Yes, I did," he replied, "but you already handled it better than anyone else could." His tone carried both love and awe, for he knew her strength wasn't in anger, it was in her calm, her grace, her refusal to let cruelty define her. For a moment, they stood side by side, not as owner and employee, but as equals, partners in life and in dignity. The pool water rippled gently behind them, its surface reflecting the fading sun, as if washing away the pain of the afternoon. A few guests approached quietly, offering apologies for not stepping in earlier. Amara accepted their words with a nod and a smile, holding no grudge in her heart. Her forgiveness didn't come from weakness. It came from a deep weeks after the unforgettable afternoon by the pool. The luxury seaside hotel carried a quiet story in its halls, one that began with cruelty but ended with grace. The staff often spoke about it in whispers, passing the tale like a secret reminder of what true strength looks like. Amara, once just a humble waitress who smiled through exhaustion, had now become the symbol of dignity for everyone who worked there. The day she was pushed into the pool by mocking guests had started as an act of humiliation, but it transformed into something far greater, lesson in character that no one could forget. The wealthy guests who had laughed that day never returned, their pride too wounded by the memory of being humbled not by anger, but by calm, poised silence. Amara didn't seek revenge, and that made her victory even more powerful. Malik, her husband, had made his point with quiet authority, but it was Amara's grace that left the deepest mark on everyone's hearts. Over time, her calm nature and compassionate leadership earned her a new position, hotel manager. Standing at the front desk in her tailored uniform, she treated everyone, from guests to cleaners, with equal kindness and respect. The hotel began to thrive, not just as a business, but as a place where people felt valued. When new employees joined, older staff would tell them about the day dignity won, how one woman's silence spoke louder than any argument, and how karma didn't come roaring in anger, it arrived quietly, dressed in class and fairness. Guests began to notice the warmth that filled the hotel, unaware that it came from a single heart that had once been broken and rebuilt stronger. Amara often walked past the same pool where her story began, the water now shimmering under the evening sun, and she would smile, not out of pride, but peace. Life had taught her that respect could never be demanded, it could only be earned, and hers had been earned the hardest way. Every ripple on the pool's surface reminded her of that day, not as a wound, but as a reflection of resilience. She had faced cruelty without losing her kindness, and in doing so, she had changed everyone around her. The story spread far beyond the hotel walls, reaching people who never met her, inspiring them to remember that real strength is quiet, and karma, when it comes, doesn't always shout, it arrives in style, just like Amara.